I've been thinking about the 1.5 million houses that the government are going to build or get built, but I think there's a really big question which isn't being asked, but the answer to that question could have a profound effect upon the property market. If you want to know what that question is, then watch this video to the end. This story started around the time of the election last July, when Labour pledged that they were going to get 1.5 million homes built. And having been elected, they then doubled down on this story. We had Angela Rayner coming out and saying that the planning system was going to be reformed to facilitate the building of all these homes. And so it has gone on. We had Sir Keir then re-pledging it at the Labour Party conference in October. And then in the new year, even more re-pledging. And we've even had Chancellor Rachel Reeves getting involved, and we'll come back to that in a moment, because there's a number of things which I think it's important to point out. It doesn't matter to me whether it's the blue team, the red team, the yellow team, the green team who are in power. This is not a political thing, but I think it's important to point out a number of facts around this statement of intent. First of all, although you could read the headlines and think that this is 1.5 million extra homes, it's not 1.5 million extra homes. It's 1.5 million homes in total to be built during a 5-year period. Now, of course, as I say, this all started around about July last year, and we're getting close to it almost being like a year gone by since they pledged this, which means if they really want to build 1.5 million homes in 5 years, they're not going to be able to do that before the next election, presumably. So it's now going to be surely 1.5 million homes in 4 years. We will see. But the second point is this. As this isn't 1.5 million extra homes, we can assume, I think, that this is over and above the normal number of homes that are built anyway. Now, we can argue about the figures, but give or take, roughly, we're talking about 200,000 new homes are built in the UK every year. So we're looking at, if it's 1.5 million homes over 5 years, that's 300,000 homes a year. So that's actually an extra 100,000 homes per year, which is still a lot, by the way. So as I say, this isn't any sort of criticism of the government. It's also not an endorsement of the government. I'm just trying to look at what that is actually being said. So what they're basically saying is they want an extra 100,000 homes built every year. And then the third thing I think we need to remember is that these homes are going to be built by private developers, subject to one proviso, which I'll come to in a moment. But by and large, this is down to the private sector developers, well-known developers whose names we know. I won't mention them here just in case I get myself into trouble, but there's lots of developers out there who build houses. They're the ones who are actually going to do this. Now, why are they going to do this? There's only one reason why a developer is going to build homes, and that's if they know that they can sell them and if they can make a profit. And that's something we're going to come back to in a moment, because I think that is the key point around all of this. But the proviso I just want to quickly touch on is that a couple of weeks ago, Rachel Reeves said that she is making £2 billion available to build 18,000 affordable homes. They want them mainly built around Manchester and Liverpool. And although at the time they were saying basically these are affordable homes for sale, I think somebody quickly chipped in, and to rent. And they said, oh yes, of course, and to rent, and to rent. My suspicion is, though, that they'd prefer to sell them, I assume, because as Chancellor Rachel Reeves has found out, there isn't any money in the kitty anymore. And so if she's going to put the 2 billion in, I'm sure she'd want these properties sold so that she can get the 2 billion back into the government coffers. I don't know. That's just me speculating. But anyway, the government are going to spend 2 billion on building 18,000 of them. But the rest of them, as I say, we can assume are going to be built by the private sector. So what is the government's role in all of this? Well, the main thing the government are doing, apart from putting in the 2 billion for the 18,000 properties, is they are reforming planning law. Now, this hasn't gone down terribly well universally. Some local authorities have been pushing back, but it seems that they're quite resolute that they're going to do this. And in this article by The Sun, shout out to The Sun, it does say that if they can slash the planning permission red tape, as they call it, property sales should increase from 290,000 per quarter in late 2024 to 370,000 by 2029. Now, I'm assuming with those figures, that's property sales in total, not just new properties, but that's going to include sales of the existing housing stock. So that's not all new houses, I would think. And it's speculated that this is going to add 6.8 billion to GDP, but, and the Sun call this bad news for aspiring homeowners, it's also been predicted that the average property price by 2029 is going to be 295,000 as compared to 265,000 in late 2025. That does surprise me, by the way, because if you think about supply and demand, if there's an extra 80,000 properties being sold per quarter by 2029, would that not suggest that property prices might actually be suppressed? Now, it could be that the 295,000 takes into account the extra sales. But the one thing we do know from basic economics is when there's more supply, prices are more likely to go down. So whether prices do continue to go up when these extra 80,000 properties per quarter are made available will all depend on demand. And this is the question which I think nobody is really asking. As I said earlier, the only reason that developers in the private sector are going to build houses is if they know that they are going to sell them and they're going to make a profit. And they know they're only going to sell them if they can see that there is demand there for these properties. Now, obviously, there's a need for housing. There's people on council waiting lists, there's people living in overcrowded conditions, there's aspiring first-time buyers who can't afford to get on the property market. But the big question is this: are they the people who are going to be buying the properties? Because I don't really think so. Not unless the government knows something that we don't. Because I've always said it, demand isn't about just wanting to have a home. Demand comes down to wanting to have a home and having the money to be able to afford to buy it. And generally speaking, the money which we use to buy properties comes from a lender, like a building society or a bank. Now, it's true that there are some people who have enough money to be able to buy properties for cash, but they're the minority and not the majority. And most of the people who are aspiring to get onto the property ladder, who are aspiring to buy their own property, are the ones who, A, probably haven't got an awful lot of money, and B, probably don't really appeal to banks in terms of their lendability. And this is where the whole thing could fall down, in my view, and why I'm slightly suspicious about this idea of building the extra 100,000 properties per year. I guess it all depends on where they're going to be built. And unfortunately, it seems that many of us have a desire to live in London and the South East, whereas if we spread out a bit across the country, we'd find that there's plenty of properties out there, many of them at very affordable prices. Of course, the counter-argument to that is that most of the good jobs which pay well are in London and the South East, and that's why people want to live there. But putting that to one side, what I'd really like to know is that once these properties are actually built, what are the government going to do to help the people who actually need to live in them to buy them? Because I don't think the government will be buying them. The government aren't going to say to the national home developers, we will buy your stock off you and we're going to use them for council houses. Why do I think they won't do that? Because the government haven't got any money. Rachel Reeves is already under immense pressure because the government's running out of cash and she's having to do things like trim the civil service and cut foreign aid and all these things which are very unpopular within her own party because it smacks of austerity. She's not going to suddenly come up with billions of pounds with which to buy properties off private property developers. So who is going to buy them? That is the question. Who is going to buy them? People on council waiting lists aren't going to buy them because they are on a council waiting list. Aspiring first-time buyers are only going to be able to buy them if they meet the lending criteria of the banks. And presumably if they already met the lending criteria of the banks, they would have already have bought. And so I just look at this and think, where are we actually going with this? Now, I don't have the answers. Maybe the government do have the answers. Maybe everybody kind of really knows that it's going to be pretty hard to build an extra 100,000 houses a year anyway, and so it may not happen. But if it does happen, I'm just wondering what will happen to those properties, which then brings me back to the whole question of value, and the value of the existing housing stock and the value of the properties being sold in 2029 or 2030 by the end of this period of building. Because if those new properties aren't actually selling, that would suggest that there would be a drag on the market, and I think we could well see a situation where supply is too much for the demand and we could actually see prices coming down. So the secondary question is, are the government doing this in the knowledge that they may cause some kind of a downturn in the property market, maybe even a crash if they hit their extra 500,000 property target? Or have they just not thought yet ahead to what the consequences will be if they manage to get all these properties built, but then there's nobody around to actually buy them? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about this. And if you're enjoying this video, then please don't forget to like, follow and subscribe. And please also come over to my website, thepropertyteacher.co.uk, that's thepropertyteacher.co.uk, where you'll find loads of resources, including free special reports, plus my very popular The Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, and the Successful Property Renovators Workshop.